Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I have two special guests today. This is from Project Liqwid. So if you're not familiar with Project Catalyst, this is the whole idea that people are submitting proposals to get funding for projects to build dApps and various other solutions to improve Cardano. And DC, Dewayne, and Joshua are joining me today, better known as Josh. You both know both of these guys, and they are very prominent in the community. So I want to talk to them more about what their project entails and what it means for Cardano. They're one of the better projects in Project Catalyst. There are a lot of projects out there, and I think that this is one of the standout projects. So DC, Josh, how are you doing today? What's going on? What's happening?
I'm doing good. I'm well. Thanks, Philippe, for having us on. I really appreciate just allowing us to kind of expand on Liqwid, what it means for Cardano, what we're trying to build with this community, and what that's all about. So thanks for having us.
No problem, DC.
So I can share my screen now.
All right.
And we can pull up the slide deck. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So just like a high-level overview of what our team is building at Liqwid, who we are. So, right, just to give a high-level overview of, Liqwid as a protocol and what our team is building, we really see our system as the first money market borrow lending on-chain system for Cardano. So this would enable anyone with ADA or a stable coin that's built on top of Cardano to engage as a lender or a supplier in the market to earn interest on their assets or to borrow against their assets, right? And there's several different use cases for why someone would want to borrow or why they would want to lend out assets that are just sitting in their wallets idle to earn interest on them, right? Can you see my OPay screen here?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, so this is kind of the Web 2 incumbent, if you will, that we like to pose ourselves up against. Liqwid is building a system that will enable anyone to engage with the borrow lend contract the same way that OPay allows anyone to download their lending app and be able to access a loan on their system right after you provide some sort of data, some sort of compliance and KYC AML verification information. These are the current figures that you see at OPay. I know we kind of went through this when I was on the Cardano Effect podcast, but I really do think that when you look at the magnitude of these numbers, and we don't have to go through each of them, but when you look at what the claim max APR is compared to what the actual borrower API or APY rather is, so what they end up paying for the loan, it really is drastic and often three-figure, sums. And it's all built around the fact that there's a predatory loan model that all of these OPay, whether they're a payday lending scheme that's a digital version, so the app loan apps, or they're just a traditional bank, they all have fixed costs that are built into the system, whether it's on the KYC AML side, or whether it's actually on the late borrower APY. So when a borrower defaults on that contract, whether it was payback X amount plus interest within 30 days, 60 days, right? Once they default on that contract, the actual amount that they end up paying in interest bumps up another, in some cases, 300+%, basically, to compensate for the fact that they're now a defaulted borrower and the lender has more risk. We're building a system that just based on incentives alone will enable someone to interact with our protocol as a borrower. So to open that loan at, instead of, and I'll go back to this slide, instead of this max claim APR of 24%, 12%, this is the actual fees that they're charging on the loan. What if you could open a loan for 0.22%? So not 22%, but 22, of a percent, right? So what I'm saying is 220, like when you look at this figure, it's an order of magnitude lower in basis points that you're actually paying on the loan origination fee side. And you just get that out of the box as the original fee that you pay. There's incentives built into our Liqwid model that would even make that cost cheaper and dynamically price it to zero. And that's kind of tied into a future version of the protocol that will have things like credit concepts, things like credit delegation built into it, and allow a user to basically not only build a credit score within our system, but incentivize them to actually repay their loans and keep a quality high credit score because you're dynamically pricing their costs closer to zero by doing so. Again, that's a future version of the protocol. not the V1 of the system, but the V1 even of the system will enable a much order of magnitude lower cost out of the box than any of the current Web 2 solutions that we see today, right? And even the DeFi protocols on Ethereum, when you look at the actual fees on the Ethereum blockchain today and the ability to scale that system, how long it takes for a transaction to process under normal operating conditions, it doesn't even compare to building the equivalent system on Cardano. So when we talk about integrating on not only the Web 2 CeFi model, there's apps like Barter, which really serves as the Venmo equivalent for Nigerians and for folks across sub-Saharan Africa to access digital currency. And we can actually build an integration on top of their mobile payment infrastructure into our Web3 liquid pools and liquid markets. And that's kind of the concept that we have here, to both integrate on top of the CeFi, traditional finance solutions, as well as think about using the ERC20 converter and some of the different primitives we get out of the box with Cardano to actually make use of all of those stablecoin currency pairs that currently live as ERC20s. Because you can, in reality, create markets for all of those. Just once you convert them, they're now a Cardano native token, just like ADA, just like any other stablecoin that launches on Cardano, right? And that's the concept behind this. So at a really high level, 40,000 foot overview of what is Liqwid, there's two key users in our system, right? The borrowers and the lenders, but they're both interacting with the central smart contract, right? The liquidity pool itself for a given market. So let's talk in ADA terms. If I deposit my ADA into this pool as a lender, I'm saying I want to earn the algo-optimized interest rate based on how utilized the actual current liquid ADA market is, how many borrowers outstanding, how much demand is there for the ADA that's being supplied by the lender side by the borrowers. So there's utilization formulas, there's a borrower interest rate formula, and it's all kind of built into our white paper. Can you see these white paper formulas?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so we don't really have to go into depth on any of them, to be honest, but what each of them mean, basically, utilization A is just a formula that's saying the outstanding loan of a given liquid market divided by the total liquidity, so the cash supplied to that market plus those outstanding loans, is what's going to define what we call the utilization ratio. And that's going to set the demand curve. So how many people actually want to borrow ADA from the liquid ADA market is going to influence the actual borrow interest rate. And you can see what the borrower interest rate here is. It's two constants, 1.3%, and the utilization actual of the market, so the borrow demand, is then incorporated as the variable ratio to then another multiplied by 10% constant. These two constants can be updated through our governance voting system. This is just a well-tested, sound economic starting place to introduce some constants in terms of percentage into the borrower interest rate formula. But again, these can be updated over time, all through governance, all through the Liqwid DAO process. And then as a result, you have the lender earn rate. And as you can see, the lender earn rate is just a function of the borrower interest rate multiplied by the utilization or the actual demand of a given liquid pool. So that is basically, and there's some other formulas and things when you talk about the incentive structure, when you talk about how you build Q tokens as the derivative token of the system. We don't really need to get into them. All that they're really saying is by using Liqwid as a lender, you deposit your ADA into our smart contract and you receive a token that's representing your ADA deposited plus each block accruing interest called a QADA token that you can then use on any other Cardano application, right? It's as if you have a receipt that's saying, okay, you just deposited one ADA into this pool. This is one ADA plus interest accruing each block to that based on the demand from the borrowers in that same liquid market. But I can use my QADA on any other DeFi or non-DeFi application on Cardano as long as I want to, basically, right? As long as they accept Q tokens. And we expect at the beginning, it will be pretty simple due to the multi-asset ledger to build functionality into all the other applications to make it pretty general and accepting different, non-native to their dApp tokens. So you can then use QADA or QUS dollar on any other Cardano dApp, basically. So that's the concept of the high level system. If we want to talk about the actual breakdown of the system, we can go into a more technical diagram. But what I think is more interesting is to look at a use case from a higher level. Can you guys see this slide of Meet Amani?
Yeah.
Right. So this is kind of a use case that's in many ways tying in everything that we've spoke to up to this point. Like, okay, so here's Amani as like a traditional borrower in current Web2 CeFi loan apps. Amani would reach out to an OPay type of app and say, okay, I want to finance my small business, my web design studio. And this is the current loan terms that I can enter. For every 100 NGN or digital Naira that I'm paying or basically trying to borrow against, I'm paying 33% of that in fees, right? On average. So 1/3 of what I intend to borrow is just being paid out in loan origination fees, in interest rate, or in fixed cost fees, right, into the actual contract itself. Not only that, there's a fixed loan duration. So whether it's 4 weeks or up to 26 weeks, these are usually short-term loans in nature when you talk about money market financial systems in the current CeFi world. So you have that time imposed restriction as well. And keep in mind, as soon as you default or go over that time limit, that's when all of those late borrower penalties really start to kick in. And it really, in many ways, becomes a compounding debt cycle, as in comparison to a compounding accruing interest cycle, right? So, what if we could flip the script and say Amani can now borrow at 0.25% interest, right? So, 25 basis points is all that it takes to originate a loan, compared to right now it's on average 330 basis points, right, for her to do that. So, an order of magnitude and just cost savings of opening the loan, and there's no fixed term duration tied to it. The only thing that Amani needs to do to keep her loan healthy is to keep the collateral ratio that's set by not only the asset that she's borrowing against, but how large her borrow balance is, right? So that if there's interest that's accruing, she needs to make sure that she's repaying that over time so that her loan is basically always collateralized and doesn't become liquidated, right? So just doing those things alone, she could basically also find a way to earn some of the fees that the protocol is generating. And that's just through protocol incentives. That's through things like subsidizing the cost. This 0.25% cost, we can subsidize up to 90% of that with an airdrop of the governance token as well. So she could basically, the cost that she had to put out to actually open the loan, you just paid her back 90% of that just by keeping the loan healthy and not getting liquidated and eventually repaying the loan. So you can build different incentives into your system to actually, not only incentivize liquidity. That's what we see on DeFi yield farming today, right? It's a bunch of yield farming and 1,000% APY and inflating to the moon and back, and that's fine. But it's actually really cooler and more of a real world use case if you can incentivize healthy loan repayment and financially incentivize folks to want to repay their loan plus interest, so that they can take out loans at a better, maybe cost structure or terms at a future date. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, much of kind of what we think as the key users of our system. Many ways we think of the emerging markets around the world and their ability to leapfrog certain systems that the West has just had to implement in the past. We saw it first with the landlines, and then we saw, countries across Africa and sub-Saharan Africa really leapfrog straight to mobile markets, straight to mobile phones, and just the whole data economy that's taken off around that. We start to see the same thing with current traditional finance and the legacy KYC and AML overhead that's built into that, and the current system that's kind of emerging across the mobile money infrastructure, which is much more of a hybrid, decentralized kind of Web3 model. It's starting on Ethereum right now, right? But eventually it'll move over to a blockchain like Cardano, and we expect that to happen in mass. We have things like Atala Prism. So what we think this is really representing is actually the leapfrogging of legacy traditional finance straight into the Web3 markets for Africa, the same way we saw Africa and India and the Middle East leapfrog from landlines straight into mobile and kind of the data-based economies that they have right now. So that's a nice way to kind of sum up what we think about at a high level when we talk about building Liqwid. If you have any questions, please I know that was a lot, so please kind of shoot at me, tell me to shut up, tell me to explain any of this in depth. I'm happy to do that.
Well, I know why you and your team won the WyoHackathon. It sounds impressive. So this is a very ambitious project. So
Yeah.
how are you going to get it done? Can you introduce some of your team and who's going to be responsible for what?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So we have Josh and Tashoma on as well. They're not sharing their cameras, but that's fine. So Josh and Tashoma are our two co-founders, and we really started this protocol as how do we build a community-led system on Cardano that takes the best of what we have right now from the staking infrastructure on Cardano, from just the community members who are actually experts when it comes to finance and these concepts of credit and how do we secure against default and risk models in our system. We've actually reached out to some folks in our community, and some folks have reached out to us, and we've managed to put together a team of not just advisors from a strategic level, but actually developers when it comes to the App Inventive and the Tweak development partners that we have basically aligned with to implement the V1 of Liqwid. We're saying we now have commercial development partners. On one hand, Tweak, who implemented Plutus as a platform for Cardano, who's prepared to step in as our strategic advisor and internal auditors. They will de-risk a lot of our protocol architecture, design concepts, audit the internal smart contracts and just the entire V1 of the protocol before it even launches on Plutus testnet or even sees an external auditor. The Tweak team will work very closely as well with the App Inventive Ethereum DeFi guys, who are basically going to be tasked with building the desktop UI and the mobile dApp itself, as well as working with our Haskell devs to build out the Plutus contract functions. We have our two Haskell devs who are our core devs, both based in Melbourne, Australia. They worked really hard over the course of the Wyoming Hackathon to build out the 5 contract functions that kind of underpin our market, and they built those all in Marlowe. I can kind of share my screen to show you what those look like, but there's a whole technical demo, 15, 60-minute video that we completed for that. So I really actually recommend folks take a look at that, just because it's a really nice way to sum up everything that we built over the course of the Wyoming Hackathon. But that was just our 2 core devs, working in Haskell, basically extending the source code for Marlowe and then building different things like the mint contract function. They built part of the borrow contract function to burn the mint within the borrow actual smart contract, all using the Haskell source code and using the TypeScript on the front end to basically extend the Marlowe playground. They then built these blocks and tested them using static analysis, using the whole simulation SMT solver. They tested these in the playground, and these blocks for the mint, for the borrow side, completely bespoke, just built for this Liqwid solution for Wyo. They were able to actually run them really well in the playground, and we did whole videos on this. I encourage everyone to look at them. Philippe, I'll send you the link so you can tag it in there. But yeah, this is everything that we have up to this point. It's all in Marlowe, and right now we're a part of the process is building these all in Plutus, right? Plutus is a general purpose language. When it launches, you'll be able to interact with different Haskell libraries that can do things like safe decimal math and introduce like dynamic exchange rates, things that we'll need when we have like the mint contract function, for instance. So all of these different parts of the protocol that really need to be built in the Plutus world, we actually are very well equipped from a developer bandwidth side to introduce all of our contract functions in Haskell. And we also have, the mobile dApp, the Ethereum DeFi, SMEs, if you will, subject matter experts on the App Inventive side to implement the desktop UI and the actual mobile dApp that's going to launch on like your iOS and Android, basically. So those are basically the different components of our development team. Again, we have Josh and Tashoma here as co-founders. We have 2 core devs that we see as really leading our technical side. I just had a conversation this morning with, a Swiss banker, management consultant who actually wants to come on and help us a lot from like actually a lot of the diagramming and like LE5 kind of descriptions of our protocol. All through Project Catalyst, we had similar ideas, and now we're basically merging those concepts together. And he'll maybe even at some point serve as like our, chief financial officer, if you will. So we really are building a team of not only developers, but strategic advisors, technical finance folks to really build out just the V1 of the system. We then see a whole V2 and a whole world of Cardano apps launching on top of Liqwid. once we de-risk and really implement a generalized platform that can just serve as a liquidity base for all Cardano assets.
Okay.
Yep. Questions?
Impressive. Yeah, so I have a few questions. Some of them are spillover from TCE episode because they're only 20 minutes per guest. So I have a few questions from there. And I also have a few questions from your Medium article. You released a article on Medium, which is pretty well written, and it's a lengthy read, but I think it pretty much sums up what you're trying to accomplish. And you have some lofty goals, like it's very ambitious, like I said before. So one of my thoughts was, there's a sentence in the Medium article that says Liqwid does not have a target region or user. Can you expand on this? Because when I look at it from a third-party perspective, I say, is this really efficient? Because you have borrowers who want to borrow, and you have lenders who want to lend. But when you're creating such a novel platform, wouldn't it make more sense to target like a small local niche market, do some testing there before like broadening it to the greater world? Are there any plans to localize it, or?
It's a great question. So let me kind of unpack how I think about this. And actually, I'm glad Josh and Tashoma are on, because they'll attest to the fact that I actually wanted to start super niche with this project. My initial plan was to actually call it Liqwid Naira Protocol and super target the Nigerian borrower who me and Josh kind of talked through the whole process flow of what it looks like to actually engage with the loan apps and the investment apps like the OPays of the world, which is the best offering right now in Nigeria. So we wanted to build a solution that directly actually speaks to that incumbent, and that was actually going to be a really niche idea. What I actually over time thought about is just the fact that, okay, Cardano is this global by nature distributed cloud in the system, right? We are saying we're building a system that allows anyone with a Cardano address to engage as a supplier or as a borrower within our markets, right? So by nature, a lot of what you're already building is global. So to try to put specific targets on it, and again, I wanted to do this to start the system. It was really the wisdom of Josh and Tashoma that was like, hey, we should think global totally when we implement the V1 of the system. Think about the specific key users, the Amanis in Port Harcourt that want to access this, and how we, talk through each process step for them. And not just the Amanis, right? The stake pool operators who want to finance, their operations over time. Like, we know that there's key user stories that we can build around the borrower and the lender side to de-risk the protocol upon the initial implementation. But when you look at the big picture of what Cardano is building and, what we actually, you talk about ambition, and if we're saying Liqwid is going to be, a real liquidity pooling market on top of Cardano, and it's going to be open APIs, open smart contracts, and SDKs that anyone can access. I mean, by nature, you're saying you're building a global financial distributed system in a cloud. So you can't really put a target region or market on that. And that's kind of what I was highlighting. There was our co-founder, Josh, he'll tell you his story. He lives in Port Harcourt, Nigeria. We were just talking about this, Philippe, before we went live. Like, this is for the emerging market user to put them on the equal footing as anyone in the West, whether you're in Switzerland or America or anywhere else in Europe, right? This is what a system built on top of Cardano can do, right? It can truly create a very more fairly distributed, equalized system when it comes to access to generating, interest-bearing strategies, right? But at the same time, you're saying by means of it being on Cardano, it is global in nature. So if you want to implement in Nigeria or Sub-Saharan Africa or India as your first initial target markets, there's 100% a whole plan and strategy towards doing that. That still keeps in mind the fact that you're going to have core devs in Australia and folks who you don't even know who are building on this from Canada, right? And it's just going to be global in nature the moment it launches on Cardano mainnet. So that's kind of where I was thinking of that. And Josh and Tashoma, I'm happy to have you guys jump in here. Just to clarify anything, I didn't want to make it seem like this was a system I was building that's like, not for anyone, but for everyone. We really do think of the emerging market user. It's super important. My family's from Jamaica. Like, this couldn't be closer to me, and disrupting in this market the way we are trying to do is like super, like going to become my life's mission at this point. Like, I think of the target user every night and day. But at the same time, I keep in mind the big picture, and Josh and Tashoma helped me do that, that this is global like the internet, just like blockchain, just like Cardano, right? So you can't just say it's for Africa or just say it's for India or just say it's for the West or Europe. It really is a system that's in many ways for everyone. But that's what makes it special, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I actually remember us having that conversation, and you know, like looking at Nigeria and the amount of unbanked people there are, this is a natural solution to that. And I understood why you were calling it Liquid Naira, especially after sitting down. You said it was like 2 weeks. You were going back and forth with Josh, etc. But you know, just looking at the nature of the protocol, like this is something that is for everyone. It doesn't mean that there can't be like a rollout, or we want people to be able to implement their own currencies and their own solutions where they are, but this is something they can plug into. But we feel like it's helpful to just highlight the case of Nigeria and you know how we are going to onboard them with the Naira ERC20 token.
Yeah, so basically for me, like if you're building it for like Nigeria, that means every other third world country is going to take advantage of it. So there's no point like centralizing it just for Nigeria. And it's a protocol on Cardano. So like by default, it's, you know, it's global. So there's no point like, you know, trying to, you know, target like a specific niche. And, you know, we have to think globally in, you know, building this, because that's the only way we can actually make that impact we're trying to make.
It's just that Nigeria is such a good use case. You know what I mean? It makes sense to talk about it because, hey, if it works in Nigeria, it's going to work anywhere, essentially. So.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's a whole concept around protocol incentives that actually really underpins. Right now, when you look at Compound and the money market equivalents of what we're building on Ethereum, they just incentivize liquidity. They're very basic and vanilla. They're just incentivizing people to give them their money send their money from their address to that smart contract. You can actually incentivize developers, you know, you can incentivize liquidators, you can incentivize Oracle pools, all these different users within the system beyond just providing liquidity as a supplier or taking out a loan as a borrower. You can incentivize different roles that become key in the market. And let me give an example of this. Josh has a Project Catalyst right now proposal to build out ABCD as a Nigerian-based, you know, African Cardano-focused blockchain development center. Whether that's Plutus focused, Marlow focused, a combination, you know, you take some JavaScript devs, you teach them how to code up things in Marlow, you get some guys learning Haskell, right? You implement that system. Now you have a bunch of young Nigerians who are hungry to build applications that people actually want to use on top of Cardano. And then we're saying, oh, by the way, here's a whole liquidity pool. If it's anything to do with finance, you can just tap into the fact that all these folks have already pooled their liquidity in this section and are earning interest. Any balance or deposit you have in your application, you can tap into liquid markets to earn interest on that. You can build basically bespoke concepts into your dApp based on, you know, liquid identity. So if we integrate with Atala Prism, for instance, now you have someone's actual Cardano address, which is either earning interest or open as a borrower. You have an Atala Prism identity tied to them, and you can build a whole world of social finance, credit, data, insurance products on top of liquid APIs and smart contracts using the pooled funds, using their history of repayment and loans and borrowers in the system that you can't actually do just building on top of base nothing. And that's kind of why you need a system like a money market, but the composability of it to then say, okay, you're incentivizing a very specific group. In this case, you know, developers that are flowing through the ABCD, you know, training courses to then use our system. And now it's not just the developers in ABCD, it's the developers in, you know, Czechoslovakia and parts of Russia who are saying, now I want game on this too. I want to develop, you know, applications on top of Liquid or on top of any other Cardano, you know, DeFi app that's composable. So you have a whole world of incentives that you can build into these systems. And I think that, you know, yeah, ABCD is going to be a target use case for us. And even just the African open source developer community, like it's massive and it's so untapped by blockchain today. I think that Liquid, and just even bigger than Liquid, Cardano needs to make a huge point of its 2021 and beyond strategy to tap into that African open source developer community. They're bright, they're smart, they're founding companies like Flutterwave, and Paystack that are getting bought out by Stripe for billions of dollars and getting big VC money. Like, these are some of the brightest devs and the youngest populations in the world. This is the future of finance, the future of identity, the future of data. It's not even close, Africa and India. So if we don't tap into these markets, are we really building a third generation cryptocurrency if we're not tapping into Nigeria and Ethiopia and sub-Saharan Africa and India? Are we really, living up to what our goals and our vision is? I don't think so. So in order to do that, it's all about open source developers. And we have ways to incentivize the onboarding of them. Similar to how you're seeing Project Catalyst start to incentivize some devs, even in the Java world, even maybe JavaScript guys, maybe they dabbled in Haskell a few years ago. Now they want to, consider building on Cardano. You can do the same thing, just building on top of the applications, using the governance tokens, all on top of Cardano. So these protocol incentives are going to be key for anyone building an application or a dApp on top of the base Cardano protocol to actually coordinate and to govern their system. This morning, I was talking to Rick and Mark's building dCloud, and he was talking about his whole voting structure and how the token will work. It's a whole system that just incentivizes stake pool operators to basically, in addition to running the Cardano node, they'll run the dCloud node on either a relay, a different server setup, or the same server as they're running Cardano node. And they can basically now host a decentralized cloud server platform that applications like Liquid's off-chain component could literally run on this dCloud platform. Once it's been de-risked and implemented from a security perspective, we could actually host our off-chain components on this platform and never rely on AWS. All on top of Cardano, all because they're using a governance token that's incentivizing the good safekeeping of their network. We're using a governance token that's incentivizing the healthy loan repayment, the healthy balances, the liquidity, the development, the future ecosystem through our DAO of our system. And it's all just working together on top of Cardano and just in this background magic. So it's really, when you start talking about incentives, man, it's like, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome, because that's how all of these systems are developed, whether it's the yield farming that you see, running DeFi and Ethereum today, or whether it's any other, real world governance system. It's all about the incentive structure. So it's very important. Yeah.
Okay, great answer. Let's talk a little bit about the token. Can you explain what the token is? I read in the paper the ticker is going to be LQD.
Yeah.
And can you tell me a little bit more about the token and what's behind it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the token is actually deeply tied to the DAO structure that we're going to set up. The entire idea of a community-led protocol means that you need to have some way to coordinate governance around the protocol's future updates, whether it be who gets the rights to the cash flows of the system, who gets the rights to update the protocol and change. Like, for instance, we showed the borrow formula above and the utilization ratio above. Who gets the right to update those constants or even change and switch to an entirely new, formula? Is it something like SIP that we have in Cardano? So these are all things that are tied to like our decentralized autonomous organization or DAO structure that we plan to set up. The governance token specifically becomes the governing mechanism for the entire protocol. And what does that mean, right? That means that if you're in the Liqwid DAO, you have, by means of owning the governance token itself, by means of interacting with the protocol, whether you're a lender just supplying your ADA to earn interest, or you're a borrower who's borrowing stable US dollar or borrowing ADA, right? You're going to be accruing the governance token just by engaging with the protocol itself. It's like you were airdropped. It's kind of like staking, right? Just by having ADA and using the system, you get more ADA, right? It's like the protocol itself is autonomously, by a ratio set, incentivizing just the liquidity of the system. But with the DAO structure, you can do things like allow different folks who own the token to vote on different proposals. So you can say things like, okay, if you're in the Liqwid DAO and you want to see us maybe integrate with one of the money market systems that exists in Eastern Europe, for example, right? Or you want to see us integrate directly with the Venmo, wallet system. You can introduce that proposal. You can set a funding amount. There's a DAO setup. There's a treasury structure that's very similar to the way the structure of Cardano's treasury actually works right now. So anyone can basically vote on these proposals, using the governance token as a coordinating mechanism, you can basically say the fees that the protocol raises are sitting in a treasury. Any of these proposals can vote on it. Everyone who uses the system is airdropped the token just by means of actually using the protocol. So if you're a borrower, this means that your costs in the system, your real costs, are actually subsidized. So that Amani use case that we mentioned, right? What if we could actually subsidize her cost of origin down to like only 90% of the cost that she had to pay to open that loan just gets subsidized? We can do that by using our governance token as that airdrop mechanism to basically incentivize just protocol utility and use. The same exact thing happens on the lender side. So if you're just supplying your ADA, you're not only accruing ADA, which is just the staking rewards plus the ADA interest in the pool, you're also getting the liquid governance token, a ratio of what you supplied in ADA, because you're providing liquidity to the protocol and you're helping us basically grow and move into the future in terms of having the liquidity needed to provide future loans of anyone who might come along and need a big loan. So both key players on the borrow and lend side are being incentivized with this governance token. Everyone who joins the Liqwid DAO is being incentivized to use the governance token to introduce proposals, some that they can implement or others, get rewarded and basically paid out in the governance token. There's also like deflationary concepts of this as well, right? So the first couple of years, the token is inflating at a rate that's high enough to basically incentivize liquidity to the system. So this whole yield farming concept that you see on DeFi today, you can introduce a very similar mechanism to fairly distribute the token itself. And you'll never need to have a concept like a pre-sale or like an ICO to introduce the actual token. Whether the token is worth a penny, $1, or $10, it's serving the exact same purpose as a coordinating mechanism for the entire protocol. So it won't really matter actually what the token is trading at. We are gonna have a fixed supply because that's how you kind of implement the long tail deflationary nature of some of these tokenomics. You introduce that by having a fixed supply and saying, okay, of every epoch, so let's say the way staking epochs work in Cardano, every 5 days, the fees that the Liqwid Protocol is able to generate on the loan origination side and the small fee that the suppliers will pay when they redeem their underlying asset and are leaving the markets, those fees will accrue basically every epoch. And then the smart contract will take all those fees in ADA, go to a Cardano decentralized exchange or DEX, buy the liquid governance token with that ADA, immediately burn 75% of that token, right? And then distribute the other 25% of that token on the borrowers and the lenders of the system, basically, in a ratioed amount to how much they're supplying. So now you have a whole concept of scarcity being built into the system, that you're removing supply from the market in linear scale to how much fees the protocol is actually generating over time. So you're basically saying the value appreciation, the value capture mechanisms of your protocol are directly tied to your governance token, which is actually directly tied to the protocol's ability to generate fees. So it's actually a really bullish mechanism that you can have because it both says, okay, the future cash flows of this system are not only tied to the protocol's ability to generate fees, anyone who just uses the protocol for free is getting airdropped the governance token, which by just holding is accruing value because a certain supply of it is being removed right from the circulating supply each epoch based on how much fees it generates. There's different implementation details. Like if we didn't want to burn the tokens, for instance, we could actually just put that 75% of tokens from the fees generated back into the Liqwid treasury. So we go back to this whole Liqwid DAO and what that means because it's so connected to the actual treasury of the protocol. You can basically say, instead of burning those tokens, we're going to put those Liqwid tokens back into the treasury and DAO, power to basically, again, introduce proposals, introduce developer bounties, developer hackathons, the ability to then vote on these different ideas and then implement them on top of Liqwid. You're basically saying you don't have to burn the token to capture value. You can actually take the token out of supply by means of having the smart contract place it back into the treasury. And now you can actually just use that token to further grow the ecosystem, the Liqwid ecosystem, by means of using it to finance different projects, different developers, different, ideas on top of liquid APIs and contracts. So you actually don't even need to burn the tokens if you don't want to. There's a different way to do it that can actually maybe even be better. So there's a lot of different utility concepts we have with our governance token. And yeah, that's I hope that clears up some things. We're going to launch an article that's kind of a more in-depth, really unpacks the entire structure of it, how you can get it, how it will work in Cardano, basically. All of these kind of deflationary concepts I'm talking about in terms of removing the supply based on the protocol's ability to generate fees. The article will unpack this in an LE5 way that will be very layman terms for folks who are non-technical. But at a high level, yes, we are introducing a token, and we do think it will be very tied to the actual utility of the platform, which is, in my opinion, the way you should introduce a token as a coordinating mechanism, more so than just a way to raise funds. This isn't about raising funds at all. This is about actually governing the future of the protocol.
Very cool. Very cool. So I don't know if you're familiar with, because that governance token model, I think it worked very well. I invested, I don't know, maybe a few months ago in that Yearn Finance YFI token. They have a similar kind of structure as far as using that governance model in order to vote on how, like, what kind of liquidity pools they're going to enter and stuff like that. So when you mentioned that there's going to be a burn, or the LQD token is going to have some sort of value. Obviously, it's arbitrary at this point, and it's going to be determined by the community. What supply are you looking at? Like, do you have a low number that you're looking at, or is it something that's going to be a very high number that's going to be deflationary over time?
Great question. So there actually are concepts around this, like how you introduce low float versus high float, what that means for price volatility of the token when you initially introduce it to the market, when buyers or sellers are basically bidding up in order books to basically set the price for the token initially. So I understand some of those concepts, and without unpacking all of it in too much detail, I'll just say we're thinking of a number as not a super high number as a fixed supply number, but it will be a deflationary asset in that the emission rate will slowly creep closer to zero over time, meaning, okay, initially you incentivize liquidity and you subsidize the high cost of the borrower's origination fee, and you subsidize what the earn rate is for the supplier. But over time, as the protocol is able to capture liquidity and secure that liquidity, you don't need to subsidize so much of that cost. So naturally, you can tail off that emission rate. And that's where, deflationary pressure starts to take in, whether it's a burn or whether it's a removal of the token from the supply, from the circulating supply. They both essentially functionally do the same thing, meaning you're removing the token from your circulating supply into a different place, whether you're burning it or putting it in this long-term vesting contract or putting it in a treasury system that, months to maybe even a year later, it'll be voted on and used to fund a proposal. It doesn't really matter. The main thing is that you're removing it from the markets that people can buy and sell it on. That's kind of the key concept behind the actual removal of the governance tokens. And again, it's all tied to the amount of the fees the protocol generates in a given epoch. So you're saying you're tying the actual value capture mechanism of the protocol to the protocol's ability to sustain itself in terms of its fees generation, in terms of its revenue over time. I hope that kind of clarifies some things. I don't want to say the exact number of the tokens yet, because we're still kind of thinking of some different concepts. We don't have a set figure yet, but again, it actually doesn't matter what the exact, token number is, right? All that matters is the concepts that you're implementing, the actual tokenomics and the distribution of the token, as long as that's equitable, fair, and sound in terms of like the deflationary theory that we want to implement, similar to, ADA or BTC, or, Ethereum pretty soon will be pretty deflationary as well. Like these concepts that you want to implement, you can do that just using the multi-asset ledger. And when you mint the actual liquid governance token, you can just build these rules into the actual, like the forging script of the actual governance tokens. So the rules that say every epoch, 75% of the tokens will be bought off Cardano dexes and removed. And either, we could burn half of it and put the other half into a treasury, We could burn the whole thing. We could put the whole thing in a treasury. We could allow people to vote on what we do with it, right? Whatever we do there, that removal of supply, that value capture mechanism, that is actually just, that's just all protocol rules that you can build into the smart contract. So we'll do that when we actually launch the governance token itself. So that's how that's going to work. Again, the price of the governance token does not matter. All that matters, the amount of tokens does not matter. All that matters is the value capture mechanism and the fact that you're tying it to the actual protocol itself in a meaningful way, and using it for governance. That's really the heart of why you want to introduce a governance token. So I hope that makes sense.
It does. Thanks for elaborating.
Sure.
I wanted to hop back over to your presentation, and I wanted to get some clarification because I didn't really understand when you were talking about the fee and you were comparing it with OPay. So you said that the fees in the Medium article, you said that the fees start at 25 basis points.
Yes.
I'm not sure if it was slightly more or less in your PowerPoint, but is this the Liqwid platform fee or is this like the lender's fee? I'm not able to differentiate which.
Sure. So it's, I should probably explain that well. Thank you. So can you see my screen right now?
Yes.
Okay. So right now we have a system where on average, you're looking at like a 22% just to originate a loan, right? So 220 basis point just to open a loan. We are saying a 0.25% loan origination fee will form the basis for anyone who wants to open a loan, a borrower in our markets. Instead of paying this 22%, 220 basis point fee, they can now pay a 0.25%, quarter of a percent, 25 basis point or bips fee to open that loan. And you're basically now saying not only those cost savings, this whole governance token, subsidizing the costs. So the cost of that 0.25%, that quarter of a percent, you are now subsidizing 90% of that cost, or even more, 95% of that cost, say, with just the Liqwid governance token itself. So that's kind of how that mechanism is working right now. There's only two fees in our system, Philippe, just to clear things up. There's the fee for the borrower when they open the loan. So we call that the loan origination fee. And that starts at a quarter of a percent or 25 basis points, right? And then there's the actual redeem fee for the lender or the supplier when they are redeeming their interest accrued over time, plus their underlying asset. So they're technically leaving the Liqwid pool. That is when a 10 basis point, so a 0.10% fee is charged to the supplier of the system, right? Again, like these are pretty competitive when you even look at Yearn. You mentioned Yearn. I think they charge something like a 5% performance fee on the way out for suppliers. We're saying we can charge basically a 10 basis point fee for suppliers on their way out, subsidize basically 80 to 90% of that even costs with the governance token. And then over time, the emission rate of the governance token will subsidize less and less of that cost as the protocol is able to generate liquidity, generate fees on the borrower side. It's all dynamic. It's all deflationary over time. And the governance token is kind of the coordinating mechanism that connects everything together. When you really think about how you can, subsidize a cost for both the borrower and, subsidize even the earned interest rate for the supplier. So, you're really saying you're going to use this governance token as like the thing that everyone just gets for free by nature of using your protocol. And that's just not for Liqwid, right? That's for Yearn and all these other DeFi protocols. That's for dCloud. That's for any real application that wants to implement a sound tokenomics policy. There's got to be a way that you actually incentivize use of the system. In our case, that means liquidity of the protocol, right?
Okay. I mean, I'm looking at those numbers, the actual APR numbers, and
sure,
that's insane. I mean, the fact that you require hundreds of percent of return. I mean, in the US and in Western economies, I mean, you can take an SBA loan and they'll give you it less than 10%, and people still default on those loans. So expecting people in places where it's more impoverished to pay back hundreds of percent, that's almost you're building them to fail at the beginning.
Let's talk about that. Because I think it's actually a bad deal for the emerging markets around the world. So much so that a whole Hindenburg research report came out on So Opera is the company that actually launched OPay. They're just like a Web2, like web search browser company, basically. And then they decided to launch all these spin-off loaning services. So all of these services that you see here, they literally all operated by a single company. Okash, OPay, Cashbane, Opesa, sorry. These are all just the same Opera company launching a spin-off of their OPay lending business in countries like Nigeria, Kenya, India, in the case of Cashbane, right? So they're just saying en masse, they're going to offer these ridiculous rates. And what this Hindenburg article uncovered was Google Play Store actually reached out to OPay and said, you have to take down your lending business from the Google Play Store. It's literally so predatory that we can no longer allow, with good faith, our customers to engage in your application that's hosted on our Play Store. So Google basically said, you take that thing down now, or we're going to shut you guys down, because that's the only option at this point. Like, it's a debt entrapment for anyone who defaults on these loans, basically. So yeah, we're building a very, you talk about numbers alone, orders of magnitude cost savings are built into our system out of the box. When you compare it to even the DeFi situation with the whole fees on Ethereum and the inability to actually scale, it's at this point just as bad as OPay. Not as bad, but it's pretty bad, right? And we're saying out of the box, we can build a solution that is much better than both the CeFi and the current DeFi equivalents, all just using Cardano infrastructure. But yeah, you're right. Those numbers they're very ridiculous.
That's wild. And that's extremely predatory. And it's unfortunate that it's happening. So one of the things that you said, so let's flip it back to lenders. So sure. Let's fast forward, say the platform is up and running. I'm a lender. There are other Cardano community members that are lenders, and they want to lend their ADA on the marketplace. They're looking for people to lend to and businesses to support. And you have this in bold in your Medium article that it's important for the capital preservation of lenders. So you want to preserve as much capital for lenders as possible. So, I mean, I did some quick back of the envelope calculations, and you mentioned 30%. Like, I think you mentioned 30%. I don't know where you put it in the article, if you were referring to maybe like an example of a cost of me as a lender lending money out to someone that wants a loan. I mean, I guess before I ask my question, what do you foresee? I know the market forces it's difficult to figure out exactly what people are going to charge and whatnot, because the platform is decentralized and people can do whatever they want on the platform. But what do you think a competitive number is for lenders to lend to people? Like, what is that? 20%? Is that 30%? What are they? Okay. What should?
Okay. Now I know what you're talking about. Okay. Yeah. I gave you a face just now because I was like, oh, you said 30%. Like, where did you get that number from? So I think what you're speaking to is, I lightly unpacked, and maybe even a little too aggressively unpacked, the uncollateralized loan product that we, in a future version of the protocol, will implement, which, yes, will have some concepts of a higher earned interest rate, because you're talking about a stable coin that's being loaned out uncollateralized, basically. So that borrower has not put up anything to be able to actually take out a loan for stablecoin. That is totally different in a future version of the system than what we're actually going to implement for the base protocol. And I actually have a nice way to show us some data of what the current, Ethereum equivalent of a money market system is giving out in terms of supplying interest rates. Okay. So first of all, let's make something clear here. There's way more demand for stablecoins than there will be for probably supplying ADA, right? Because the concept is no one wants to deal with the price volatility of a loan in ADA. It's much more akin to normal finance to take out a loan in a stablecoin like DAI or US dollar coin than it would be to take out a loan in something like Ethereum or Uniswap uni tokens, right? So what you see at the compound markets is the supply for DAI right now is 3%. So imagine if you could just by having US dollar, sending it to this contract, earn 3%, or if you have US dollar coin, 4.3%, right? So But if you have Ether, you're only earning 0.12%, and that's really not that amazing. So what does Compound do to negate that? Can you see my screen here?
Yes.
So what Compound does is they say, okay, we can only pay you because, again, everything is based on supply and demand, and that utilization formula that I showed you, that's what every single money market, whether it's CeFi or DeFi, is based on. So at the end of the day, you can only guarantee an earn rate based on how much demand there is on the borrow side for that asset, right? In this case, it's ETH, and you can just see there's just not much demand rate. It's only the utilization compared to how liquid this ETH market is. It's only being utilized 5% of its capacity, right? Of the bandwidth of liquidity in this market, only 5% of it is being utilized. If more of it was being utilized, if 50% of it was being utilized, look at these numbers. Look at what the borrower would be earning and what the lender would be earning, what the borrower would be paying, right? Compared to the current, right? So you have to think about that, but then you think about, okay, now they're using their comp governance token to actually subsidize that earn interest rate. So they're saying, okay, you only get 12 basis points to supply your ETH, but we'll also give you 15 basis points APY. So basically, just for supplying ETH, we'll give you that airdrop this governance token for free. So now your net earn rate is closer to almost 30 basis points APY, which is in line with like a decent money market savings account in America today, pretty much like in the West, right? You're talking about yielding really not that much, like something between like 0.5% up to like 3%. 3% is like really amazing. That's like not happening in this market. But you know what I mean? Like, so again, then you look at DAI, totally different script. You got folks who are supplying just earning 3%, but with the actual governance token being basically subsidizing their earn rate, you're getting an additional 2.28% on top of that. You're basically earning effectively 5.3% interest just to supply DAI. And the reason they can do that is because the utilization of DAI is so much higher in Compound. Remember that 5% where you saw ETH just now? The current DAI market is being utilized almost 80% basically right now. Meaning you can actually have so much more percent APY subsidized to the supplier and on the borrow side compared to what you can do for like a coin like Ether or a coin like Uniswap, where it's just, you're so much more price volatile, just less demand on the borrow side for that token. So like when you look at Uniswap, for instance, right, you only airdrop 0.78% of the governance token on these suppliers because there's not much borrowing demand for it. When you look at the borrowing demand, they're only at 25%. If they were higher at like 75%, you'd have to be subsidizing much more of this on the suppliers and the borrowers. So that's kind of how you use the governance token. And again, Compound is using their COMP comp token to subsidize liquidity and subsidize borrowing the same way we plan to use Liqwid to subsidize borrowing and liquidity on top of Cardano. It's the same exact concept, but then we have things like a DAO and like actual credit delegation, future mechanisms that will actually provide so much more utility to the token itself beyond just incentivizing liquidity.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. Now, when we look at this project in its totality, and DC, I mean, we've been talking for a long time. I mean, I talked to you in 2018. You're an OG in Cardano. You've been here since the beginning, so you are very familiar with this project. And you mentioned Atala Prism, and once again, this project is very ambitious. How much levity are you putting into the idea that what if the products that Cardano is supposed to be releasing become even more delayed, like Atala Prism, yeah, and Marlowe and Plutus, and making sure that Goguen is fully functional? We know that there's deadlines now, Q2 of 2021. But we take that with a grain of salt. It may push it back 1-2 quarters. We don't know exactly. So how do you maintain funding? How do you maintain the project interest if things get delayed another 3-6 months or even longer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I want to start off by saying the V1 of the protocol might not even have Atala Prism. it certainly won't have credit concepts. It certainly won't have, robust credit delegation tied to the Liqwid DAO. It will have a compound money market built on Cardano with a DAO structure tied to the actual coordinating governance token. It will be very bare bones, very V1 of a system, of a protocol, right? We are attacking the liquidity pooling, lending, borrow markets, right? That is our key use case of why we're building or introducing Liqwid. Everything that we talk about in terms of Atala Prism as the base of identity to de-risk credit and uncollateralized lending, credit delegation in the system to de-risk uncollateralized lending, different incentivized systems, incentivized structures to basically dynamically cost down the borrow rate. All of those like really, fancy features come in the future once you've actually implemented a system and got some product market fit around that. In terms of, are we waiting on certain things from IOHK? Not really, right? Like I said, we're not waiting on Atala Prism, and we know that will be open source at some time in the future. We have ongoing talks with the IOHK folks that are actually building Atala Prism and on the IOHK enterprise side. So we have a timeline of when these things might hit. As a result of being a Project Catalyst funded group, we're also going to have insider access to these developer teams and the product teams that are building these things. So we'll know exactly when we can talk about queuing up our product cycle with things like identity for Atala Prism, right? For Oracle pools and price data, we actually de-risked a huge part of that just by watching Simon Thompson give that Marlowe Oracle demo. Like that Kraken price feed, extrapolate that to be able to take the top 10 exchanges price feed data, and you now have a pretty robust way because those exchanges are publicly signing that price feed. So there's some reputation risk on their end. So you basically have accurate price feed data for free, verifiably, right, as well, that you can use in your system. And you no longer have to worry about implementing Oracle pools or creating some crazy incentive structure for stake pools out of the gate. You can de-risk those concepts and then implement them later in the future in a way that makes sense for all the key users of the system, right? So we are actually, I come from like a consulting background and I work with software developers every day. We think about lean and agile concepts when it comes to at least implementing, government level, software and different applications that we're building in kind of an agile, rapid development lifecycle. It's all about trying to be as key to that, as close to that low level decomposed user story or wireframe, right? That key use case that you're building upon, that's what we're trying to implement. So I don't want to like think of Atala Prism or even Plutus as like something that's stopping us, because think about this. Plutus testnet is coming before 2020 ends, no matter what. Our V1 of our protocol is most likely going to be smart contracts and a full dApp that's launched on Plutus testnet before it launches on the mainnet protocol. So in many ways, we're actually walking in step function with the development of the underlying protocol. We're really not relying on them for anything because we can start building these things now. Plutus Playground it's damn near close to like what a alpha or a beta version of Plutus will be. So we can build against that. And our Haskell devs have basically been doing that in the background.
Okay. Good answer. I do want to touch on the Atala Prism thing. So even though it's not on this version 1, might be in later versions, I just wanted to ask more of a conceptual level question. So you mentioned in the Medium article that you're going to be airdropping LQD tokens for basically the repayment of loans. And I'm not sure if I understood that correctly. Sure. Could you go into a little bit more detail?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So again, and I can probably clarify this in the Medium article because I think that some of the concepts around the uncollateralized product are like seeping into the concepts around the V1, which is a crypto collateralized backed lending money market on Cardano. So when we talk about, okay, what does it look like to actually subsidize the cost? We're talking about subsidizing the cost of loan origination fee. So when that borrower actually opens the loan, at that point, we would subsidize maybe 50% of the cost that they had to actually pay that 0.25%, 25 basis point fee. We would subsidize a percentage of that cost. For the uncollateralized loan product that I think you're talking about, I was mentioning the fact that you can use protocol incentives to basically subsidize, say you subsidize 95% of the cost of an uncollateralized loan, but you only did that upon repayment of the loan. So you said, okay, you just had a loan for $100, stablecoin on Cardano, right? 100 USD. Now you need to pay back a loan that has a 20% interest tied to that, right? So we're saying upon the repayment of that principal plus interest, then we will airdrop and basically subsidize 95% of the cost, that interest cost that you had to bear, because it was 20% plus maybe even a higher loan origination fee. We'll subsidize that cost upon repayment of the loan as a way to de-risk the fact that you're now introducing uncollateralized lending into the system. For the normal borrowers of the system, they'll just get that cost airdrop to them, like in terms of the form of the Liquid token, as soon as they pay the cost of the loan origination fee, right? So you open a loan on the system, you're now subsidized a percentage of that loan cost with the governance token, right? In ratio to both what liquid pool you're using and obviously how large the volume, the size of your borrow actually is. So that's kind of how the ratio works in terms of using the governance token to subsidize costs. Again, it's very similar to what Compound's doing right now in their V1 to subsidize liquidity on the supplier lender side, and then subsidize the actual cost of the loan borrow rate, the APY on the borrow side. So similar concept. We're just kind of taking something that's pretty proven at this point in DeFi and building it into a Cardano DApp.
Okay, it makes sense. It makes sense. So a follow-up question also for Atala Prism. So this is a V2 question.
Sure.
I guess when we're speaking about uncollateralized loans, you mentioned when you're integrating your product with Atala Prism, trying to create an identity for the borrowers. So you made an analogy to like the credit score system within the US. So I mean, there's different credit bureaus and you can build up your credit score. My question is there a maximum amount that borrowers can take out given their credit score? Is there a max limit? Because I know in this country, like there are ways to build your credit score up. You can build it up for a couple years and you can crash that out. You can liquidate, you can get a mega loan and just kind of just skirt the system, file bankruptcy or do something. You can meander your way. I mean, my worry is that if the borrower's amount is too high, there's a way that they can game the system over a year or a couple of years and just take out a massive loan and just kind of crash the system. Is there an issue like that there?
Okay, so let me just clarify your question. You're talking about specifically on the uncollateralized or the collateralized loan side?
Uncollateralized.
Right, okay. So in the future version of the protocol, when we introduce uncollateralized loans, yes, to your point, it will be tied to their credit score and to kind of a max within the Liqwid DAO structure. But more importantly, actually, there's this concept of a growing rate of credit line, meaning you start off with a very low credit line and a fixed interest rate. So you say, for instance, you can only borrow $100 US of this Cardano stablecoin uncollateralized at a 20% borrow APY. And not even borrow APY because you're paying 20% on that loan. So you're saying you are now going to pay up the cost of, so built into that formula of 20% fixed costs is a model that can actually account for 33% of the loans defaulting. And still, I think the number was like 12.25% is what the borrower would still end up paying to the lender over time. Even if 33% of those borrowers defaulted, which is actually in line with what Western and European credit card default ratios actually look like today. Around 30 to 33%, 35% is right around the number of defaults that you see today. We built basically a returning, a rate of credit line growth model that can account for a 33% default rate. And still, because they're paying a 20% kind of very fat cushion as a borrow rate, over time, they're paying off the fact that 1/3 of them may default on this. So they're paying upfront the ability for 1/3 of them to default on this and still pay out to the lenders over 12.25% interest, basically. And all of the math that we have for that is there's a formula that we introduced in the white paper. There's an entire model that we've built out around this. We have, a specific dev who's a data science researcher based in India who's going to help us implement this. Again, this won't be until a future, maybe months past the V1 launch protocol version. So we are really talking about a system that's going to be really de-risked, very tied to the Liqwid DAO and credit delegation mechanism. But yes, to your point, you're not just going to be able to enter our system and take out a massive loan. No, to do that, you'll have to collateralize that loan, like 75% or 60% collateral limit, basically. To take out uncollateralized loan, not only will you need to have an Atala Prism and identity tied to that, you'll need to have been verified by the Liqwid DAO credit, like DAO structure, basically, which is really a decentralized credit union when you think about it. There's a notion of credit delegation, meaning someone in the Liqwid DAO structure can basically delegate their credit to someone they know that they believe will repay that uncollateralized loan to give them maybe a lower cost of interest. So there's many different incentives you can build in that tie the Liqwid DAO structure and these well-trusted actors in the ecosystem to this uncollateralized lending product that you want to introduce, which actually makes you way more competitive with the current lending and traditional finance markets. It's all based on uncollateralized lending. None of it is based on collateralized lending when you look at traditional loan products today. So it's something that DeFi in general is already pivoting towards. When you look at what's happening on Ethereum and the introduction of credit concepts, things like teller finance, things like Barn Bridge to basically say you can de-risk tranches of loans in DeFi. There's entire concepts around basically building in uncollateralized lending into these DeFi protocols. We just have a sound way we think of doing it that ties Atala Prism when it's ready and open source and transparent and de-risk, as well as our DAO structure and some things like credit delegation into it to really bring in a safe, secure model. Like you said, capital preservation is everything for us. Even when we introduced this, and I kind of highlighted this in the Medium article, it's an opt-in, opt-out for the suppliers. Like, yes, you're going to earn a higher percent interest, but that's because there's a higher risk of default when you're talking about an uncollateralized product. As a result, you give them the option to either continue supplying their stablecoin, right? And this is only for stablecoins. So you give them the option to continue supplying their stablecoin to the purely collateralized base vanilla compound-like, stablecoin market on Liqwid, or you allow them to opt into this, higher risk structure. You're going up on the risk yield, right, on the risk curve, but you're also saying as a result of going up on the risk curve, you're going to be paid more in an earn rate because it's a fixed 20% or even up to 22% interest rate that the borrower is actually paying. So that's kind of how you de-risk and introduce an uncollateralized loan product, in our opinion. I hope that made sense. But again, if it didn't, it's okay because there's going to be so much LE5s and diagrams and breakdowns before that even sees the light of testnet, right? So I don't want to spend too much time kind of focus on that. It's something we think about because, again, I come from this deep technical finance background, and it's just like the way I think to really bring a 0-to-1 innovation to Cardano. That's how you do it. But again, things have to be put in place. Atala Prism, the de-risking of the DAO structure, the de-risking of credit delegation, the math behind this model, all of those things have to be de-risked before you can actually introduce this, even on a testnet version. And obviously audits and internal testing and QA, all of those things built into the system, unit testing, all of these things get built into the process. And that's why we got with App Inventor. That's why we got with Tweed. They're corporate partners that are just really good at building rapid, agile software in a way that actually de-risks a lot of the protocols and puts an emphasis on testing and quality. A lot of what Tweed builds today is fintech-based, Haskell-based applications. They do bioengineering, Haskell, and some other really kind of niche data science type of development. So they're speaking to a very niche type of developer and entrepreneur. And it just happens to be the way that we line up with Tweedus and what we're building just really fits with what Tweed is trying to do from their fintech side of things that we were able to build them on. Same thing with App Inventor, really. The reason we have this bandwidth is because we have those dev partners, no doubt about it.
I follow what you're saying. I think it's pretty clear. And I think it's very interesting, very interesting. Kudos to you and your team. I have one last question, not necessarily Liqwid related, but in the Medium article, you spent a couple pages. I mean, I think at least like 3 pages. And basically you were just talking about the transition from centralized finance to decentralized finance from CeFi to DeFi. And I'm very curious as to why, I understand your bullishness. I'm less bullish, but you are very bullish on that transition from CeFi to DeFi. So I don't know if you wanted to speak to that a little bit and
Sure.
where you see all these things going.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I thought it was important to unpack that because, okay, you're talking about implementing the first, liquidity pooling concept that enables anyone on Cardano to become, an earner of interest or a borrower instantly. So innate built in that is this concept of disintermediating from centralized traditional finance into this Web3 model that allows you to do very similar things in, a completely decentralized, just model operating system that you have to actually own that. And that means a lot of things, right? That means understanding the current system, what you're actually posing yourself up, whether it's the money markets or the OPAs of the world, understanding how, debt and interest works today, how these concepts like time value of money that we're actually using to underpin our system, how those things work today. I just thought it was really important to kind of set that context before I got into all of this, Web3, online internet money, and, kind of money robot algos. And it really gets technical and heady when you start talking about the way these smart contracts operate and take over and how decentralized, technology is really going to replace a lot of the products we see in current legacy finance. But I think, just setting the scene for someone who maybe comes from a more traditional finance background, maybe someone who understands a little bit about DeFi and is a Cardano enthusiast, really trying to speak to a broad crowd rather than like a niche specific user. I thought that it was important to kind of really set something that was relatable to them before I kind of unpacked my ideas. And I feel like to most people, the most relatable thing is, looking at what's happening in global macro politics and finance and saying, okay, how do you build decentralized systems that in many ways replicate what these products and instruments are doing, but just build in so much more efficiencies and so much more, just pushing of power to the edges than what we have in the current, legacy model where we just delegate all of that to the banks and the financial institutions. So I thought it was super, and yeah, I'm bullish on it, no doubt. Yeah, you've known me since 2017, Philippe. Like, I was bullish, thinking Goguen was coming literally before 2018 got here, and then we got smacked with the delays and la la la. But it doesn't matter, right? Because we're here now, and at the end of the day, they built a Leviathan. This thing is a beast, right? It's a decentralized cloud system, and we're going to build the decentralized financial operating system right on top of it. So I think that, again, if you read my article, if you just look at the way that debt and yield works today in traditional finance, and just I use certain concepts because I come from this, science pre-med background before I got into finance. And I talk about things like the physics of money, of global money, and what it means when you have $16 trillion globally yielding negative debt. Really, I think, take a moment or two to read the article, maybe once or twice, and unpack what that means in the context of this super small, just burgeoning field of DeFi. And to think of the concept that on Ethereum, it's kind of happening and popping off. On Cardano, we have absolutely nothing, right? We are just starting from absolutely zero. And the market upside is literally, the total addressable market is in the trillions, undoubtedly, right? So that alone is reason to be very bullish. And I think this is a nice way to end, actually, because without even speculating on the future price of ADA or the value of the Cardano system, without even having to, think about what the upside is, just scaling it to the actual volume and liquidity that you see in traditional markets, whether it's debt, whether it's scarce assets, whether it's global equities, whatever it is, right? You are talking about like a blip of a blip on a screen compared to the ocean that is, global macro finance. And Cardano is a part of that. DeFi is a part of that. Liqwid is really trying to encapsulate all of these concepts and build the base structure on Cardano that any developer can build on top of using our APIs and smart contracts. Any borrower or user can access, any stake pool who wants to host and have ADA delegated to their pool. We haven't even gotten to the dual ADA staking and earning interest strategy. We haven't even touched on that yet, Philippe. That's for like a whole nother episode, I feel like. But there's so many things that building a decentralized cloud on top of Cardano gives you that we plan to implement, just being the base money market system, right? And just being the first to market on Cardano to do something like this. Of course, there will be competitors, and we welcome it. As someone who's, long invested in Cardano, I want Liqwid to have competitors, I want Liqwid to have other, borrow lending, other trading Uniswap-like protocols on Cardano, because that means there's a whole DeFi field of credit, data, finance, insurance products, protocols that are just launching on Cardano every single week. To me, you can't be more bullish on that, because then you're not talking about just decentralized finance. You're not just talking about disintermediating banks. You're talking about disintermediating insurance companies, disintermediating credit bureaus, entire, markets and structures, institutions, entire classes of sectors get disintermediated when you can introduce things like credit, data, finance markets all on chain. So it's way more bullish than just DeFi, in my opinion, when you really start to see the big picture. But yeah, DeFi is a great place to start. It's like the low-hanging fruit of crypto almost. Just everything you get with blockchain and identity, it makes it really easy to start building out DeFi that replicates CeFi, just with way more efficiency of smart contracts, obviously. So yeah.
Very impressive. Very impressive. My final thoughts on Liqwid, I'll repeat it again. It's a very ambitious project. It's seems like it's a lot of work, and the payout could be for the entire Cardano ecosystem could be huge. And I do think y'all need more funding, and because I think it's going to take money to build this. But if it's built correctly, it could really, really take off. And for that reason, you definitely have my vote when it starts. And I think it's a very interesting project, very interesting, and I think it's one of the best in Project Catalyst right now. So kudos to your whole team. Kudos to your whole team. Man.
Yeah, we really appreciate that, and we plan on we're here for the next decade. Like you look at us, we're all young guys. Like we've been with Cardano from the start. Like we're not going anywhere, right? We're here to see this thing not only implemented on Cardano, but I'm here to see, Josh's ABCD and, Nigeria-based developers start building dApps on top of Liqwid that talk to our, Liqwid pools and access our markets. Like that, to me, is when we've actually made it and succeeded in terms of what our long-term vision is for this project. So we're not even warming up yet. We're just stretching. So let's get Project Catalyst going. Let's get some voting rounds in. And we really think that we got something special in terms of the dev partners, the team that we've built. We can really implement something special for all of Cardano, like you said.
Awesome. Josh, Tashoma, do you have anything you want to say?
Yeah, I want to say thank you for actually having us on here. I mean, it's pretty amazing for us, having the opportunity to actually express, our ideas and what we've been trying to, build for the community. So really appreciate you having us.
I'm a secret fan, bro. Like I've been watching your show for a while. Like, when you was in the room with your little friend and talking about it, I've been watching the videos, man. And you've been educated as well. So I just want to say thank you in that regard.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys. And we should do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Yeah.
When does voting start?
Man, that's a great question. I feel like if through 6 of the current schedule, end of November, but that could easily get pushed back a few weeks. So it's kind of up in the air, to be honest. But right now, end of November, mid-November earliest. But yeah, we'll see.
Okay.
We're excited.
Sounds good. Okay, we'll wrap this up. Thanks everyone for listening. The timestamps are down below. I'll add the timestamps, and then I'll add any links that you send me, DC, and put it in the description. And yeah, that's it. And thanks for watching, everyone. Bye.